And he's a devotee of Ira Harris. Well, they have
I don't think so.
anyway, so John, what I think we wanted to keep things very simple and basically just use your February 12th FT article as a jumping off point, just to get the conversation going. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys, handing it over to you, and welcome everyone.
I appreciate it. This is Judd. I'm going to mute myself, and everybody can ask questions and put them in the chat. I will see them, and Richard will be able to see them, and they'll take the conversation. And whatever we basically start to talk about, I'm just going to put up the relevant charts, whether it's yield curves, currencies, bond markets, whatever.
Terrific.
Okay. All right, Richard, I'll let you do the introductions, and I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. I'll just do a little intro, and then we can get into the
Wait, do you want me to keep my video on, or should I?
I'm looking at a chart now. Hello?
Yes, guys are trading right now.
Oh, okay.
So, this is a full-on trading room. We have RIAs in here. We have independent traders. We have swing traders. We have long-term investors. So everybody's got a little bit different style. And this is where I start the day looking at the S&Ps. We've gone over that this morning already in the technicals. And this is, the 30-year bonds, the oil, nat gas, metals, a lot of the currencies. There's a whole mix of things.
Wow. Okay, great.
All right, so I'm going to mute myself again. And Ira, you and Richard figure out what you guys want to do as far as video.
Okay, well, I'll mute my video. I just didn't know, Richard, whatever you want me to do. Do I have to be video? What do you want?
No, I think we can do a focus on the charts from Judd. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll get my,
Yeah.
my video.
Okay.
Richard, if I can ask just one thing, you have a beautiful speaking voice, but it's a little bit low, so you might want to increase your volume.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, welcome to FRA's Roundtable Insight. This is Richard Bernoulli. Today we have a roundtable discussion and analyst with a very special guest, John Dizard, along with all of us participants and traders, including Ira Harris, Andrew Perry, and many others here in the White Wave Strategies Trading Room, led by Judd Hirschberg. Alexandra Penn here in the trading room has been gracious to help bring this discussion together. A bit of background on John. John has been a financial journalist for over 30 years. He writes a weekly column for the Financial Times, which covers global macro investing, the political economy of currencies, energy, commodities, emerging market debt, the international and domestic credit markets, automation of securities exchanges, and economics and finance in general. He also writes for the New York Post, New York Observer, National Review, and many other publications. Previously, he was the London Bureau Chief of Institutional Investor, a correspondent for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and the managing editor of Canadian Business Magazine. John has also acted as an advisor to several large individual investors. He often appears on CNBC, Fox News, and CBC. He lectures regularly to financial and energy groups on market issues such as the prospects for various currencies and the restructuring of the electricity grid. We also have Judd here as the president of White Wave Trading, a trading company, and our partner for trading research consulting services. He has run very many proprietary trading groups, over 45 years of trading experience. Ira is a hedge fund manager, a global trader in foreign currencies, bonds, commodities, and equities for over 40 years. He has served as CME director from 1997 to 2003, and also a stint most recently. Welcome all. Welcome everybody.
Hi.
Hey, Richard, thanks and Judd, for lending your platform for this. And thank you for Jonathan Dizard for all the columns that you have written that I have read and have been able to put into use in a very profitable way over many, many years. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you. You're
Notwithstanding last week's where we
Yeah.
all made money.
And I'll add to that, and thank you, Ken, for organizing this, Richard, for the introductions, and equally, John. I've read your work, and I'm very privileged to be involved in this.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Well, I'm very, very happy to be here. Ira, I've followed for a long time, and Sandra's an old friend. And I should update my resume. But you're flattering me to say that I've been writing for more than 30 years. It's actually a bunch more than 30. But we'll leave it at that for the moment. In any event, yeah, I was looking at fertilizer before fertilizer was cool, as they say, and I just started the beginning of last year, especially. I found it interesting, and the European Union, strangely, they have a somewhat the politicians and policy people, and for that matter, the media, have a somewhat magical notion about where stuff comes from, and including gas and oil. And it was basically, especially for people who come up with a policy like net zero, they, I think at some level, actually believed what they were saying. I mean, the Russians didn't, but they're not always right, but they've been right about this. And I mentioned Eurochem in my column, but there are others, Fuzagro, Acro, and they have the Russians and the Putin regime. They've actually increasingly strengthened their corporate governance guidelines, not because they're nice people, but as a means of control. They also have a high dividend policy. So you have double-digit yields on Fuzagro, for example. And Gazprom is a slightly more hazily managed company. But where the fix comes in here is to manage things tightly and even closer to IFRS rules than you might think, and then to have a high dividend policy, excuse me, so that the dividends can be paid up to the Putin and his friends' holding companies. And they've realized that it's a much more effective means of control. Now, the Russians have not managed everything, and particularly the intellectual potential of the Russian people and their work potential. But they did get very good people gradually clawing and stabbing and scheming their way to the top of basic industries. And they realized the potential of their fertilizer, the existing fertilizer assets and existing gas assets, and have worked to maximize them. I wonder myself about how sustainable Russian gas production is. There was a rule change, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the OPEC plus agreements, Russia pushed fairly past couple of years to add condensate to their oil production capacity. Now, I didn't see which condensate that was, and it's okay. It suggests, and other indications suggest, that they've had trouble maintaining their production. So last summer, when Europe was trying to fill the gas storage, the outlier there was Gazprom, which did not fill, very minimal filling of its gas storage, and instead concentrated, they said, on filling gas storage in Russia. There was part of this was, perhaps a master plan to choke Europe over the winter, but it might also have been production limitations, I'm thinking, or a mix of the two. In any event, I actually found it difficult to communicate to my editors that ammonium nitrate fertilizer in recent decades or longer has natural gas as its principal input, and that unless you drilled for natural gas, you'd be dependent on others. And there was the word drilling that really bothered them, I think, because that was the word drilling, because it suggested that you could be using drilling rigs and unpleasant, dirty people who are sympathizers to the oil industry to produce the fertilizer you need to eat. And it was a struggle. In any event, finally they let it through because it seemed so technical and distasteful anyway. But I think they still haven't grasped that. I haven't yet worked on trying to show them that silicon for solar panels is made by substituting the oxygen in sand, silicon dioxide, with carbon dioxide. So you actually have to emit carbon dioxide to create silicon for solar panels. But it baby steps. So I'm going to work on that some other time. That's the simplification of the production, of course. In any event, the Europe and the US, for that matter, with the restrictions on various restrictions on domestic production, and for that matter, restrictions in various states, especially California, for trucking, are managing to stretch out the commodity shortfalls as long as they can. And that's interesting for speculators, not as good for the consuming public, and conundrum, as they say at the Fed, for Fed policy. Having created a problem, they now have to somehow uncreate it or even admit that they did it in the first place. So in any event, I expect that that this will that the squeeze in Europe on gas supplies will continue, and there's even a coal shortage. They attempted to import more, embarrassingly, more coal from Russia, but the Russians told them that there just wasn't the capacity on the Russian railways to do it. So I think they have to have another conference soon. That I think would solve everything. But in a warmer place than Glasgow this time. I'm thinking the Côte d'Azur, or somewhere really nice. Maybe expensive, but it's all for the climate. Anyway, that's my that's kind of shows you where I kind of had to go to. Oh, I might add, in the sanctions that they want to tighten on Russia, I mean, no, I don't like Russian policy, but on Russia and Belarus, between them, they also have Belarus Kali and Ural Kali, another Russian producer, who produce a huge amount of potassium fertilizer. And to cut them off is also to cut off that. Potassium fertilizer can be, you can postpone applications of that, with less damage than postponing applications of ammonium nitrate. And Russia also has a an increasingly strong position in lobbying in Europe for its fertilizer output. And at some point, they're going to point out that correctly, that there's a lower cadmium level in their phosphate production, their phosphate output and marketable fertilizer than there is in Moroccan phosphate, for example, or Polish phosphate. And they'll use this, go through I think their plan is ultimately to go through a food safety regulation, consumer safety recommendation, and ultimately reduce the allowed cadmium levels, and so create a built-in market for their phosphate fertilizer as well. So the Europeans have still not brought themselves to allow more drilling to produce their own gas. Sometime this past winter, somebody at a cocktail party asked me, well, but then what should Europe do or France do? I said, well, if you go to the top of the Total tower in La Défense in Paris, and then look to the horizon and pick out spots where there's fewer buildings or more open fields, then put down a drilling pad, drill, frack, run it through a gas processing plant, because you're sitting in the middle of a basin, the Paris Basin. And when I said the word fracking, they looked at me as though I'd proposed intercourse with, a barnyard animal. Just a terrible thing. It's done other places, but not in Europe, thank God. So I think they're a ways from realizing what's going to happen. As far as the military action in Ukraine, I'm kind of a skeptic on the large-scale action. I think the Russians are commercially and politically perfectly happy with this ambiguity. It's certainly kept a price premium for imported gas in Europe, which the Russians do well by. And has occupied their time while they don't notice what other Russians are doing in Africa, which is gobbling up the Sahel with mercenaries who then get paid not in CFA francs but in gold. If it's not a plan, then it's a really great combination of circumstances from their point of view. And I have to admire their nerve and their estimation of their opposition, which so far has been great. Anyway, so that's what I think it's going to be hard to cut short this commodities or things price rally without inducing a serious recession. Not that they can't bring themselves to say that that's what it is, but that's what it is. That's what is required.
And just a
John,
question on the
John, did you say before that someone was being paid in gold in an emerging market, as opposed to?
Well, you can debate or speculate, so to speak, about the scale that's happening on. But you're talking about the Wagner group, a group of music lovers and mercenaries who are active not only in Syria, where they got waxed by the U.S. Marines, but also in Africa, where they are present in Chad, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and a bunch of other places. And they have a gold refining company, or gold that's part of and a gold trading company that's part of the same commercial group. That what the cross shareholdings or interests are is not clear, but I did check that out. And if you're not the currency or former currency in Mali and in Burkina Faso was the CFA franc. And if you the U.S. government says that the Wagner Group has been promised $10 million a month by the junta in charge of Mali. And since the Mali, has been expelled or suspended and its reserves frozen by the central bank for the CFA franc, there's a limited functionality to their quasi-convertible currency. And so where are they getting this 10 million? Well, Bamako in Mali is a refining point for a lot of artisanal gold mines in Central Africa. And while I think only 3% of the Malian population has access to electricity, the refineries in gold refineries in Bamako have no problem 24/7, totally reliable, open for business, come on in. And while nominally air links with Mali are closed under this embargo, the Turkish and Mauritanian airlines seem to be operating there. And with gold, you don't really need a massive port. You can just fly this stuff out to, say, Dubai. Not that the Dubai exchange, of course, would engage in any trading in conflict gold. They wouldn't do that. They might buy. It would be a violation of their undertakings to their international partners. What they might do is buy some jewelry finds and used bracelets or chopped up gold ingots that are, since gold is a basic element, are untraceable after they go through a refinery. But they could also the Dubai people might say, "Oh, no, this could be dirty money. We're not going to touch it," and then somebody might sign and then ship it to Istanbul instead, and then you can you can see whether they'll accept your gold or not. But I'm not promising that would happen, but there might be a chance that they could.
And your thoughts, Ira?
Okay, can I, first of all, John, this whole discussion, again, really gets to why really you are such a good journalist. Because you dispel narratives, right? And when you talk about what you have to go through to get certain things published in the paper, and how you have to dance around the editors, and because, well, this is a buzzword they may not like, you are dispelling narratives, which I just love. And last week's piece on the fertilizer was every bit of that. And I have to read it 3 times because a lot of times I have to read through when you write. You're a little more nuanced than John Plender, who I also love, by the way, because I think John really gets at it. But you challenge the narrative, and I love that when you go with Russia, because a few years ago, Judd, one of our favorite stocks was, of course, potash before it became Nutrient.
Right.
But the Russians made big gains on, really, as you rightly point out, attaining a gigantic foothold, because they bought, I think it was, it may have been they bought a huge potash concern. It may have been a Belarus, but it really helped them consolidate that fertilizer into the business. So Putin proceeds with, he doesn't do things willy-nilly. He knows where he's going here, unfortunately. And unfortunately for Western thinkers who thinks that their models dictate everything and that everybody's going to do exactly as they've been pre-programmed to do it. And that's just not the case. And Europe has really been wrong-footed here. And I think, well, Penn had told us you're in Paris or somewhere in France.
Paris, yeah.
Yeah, and so you have the Europeans have been really wrong-footed, but more importantly, and the piece, well, the FT actually got to it last week for the first time in a long time. But Gerhard Schroeder is such an important element, he is the key participant in this. You know, and I was talking to a very knowledgeable foreign policy person last night who said, well, he just sold his soul. I said, it's so far more than that because Schroeder's been there for a long time. And his role in Gazprom has been instrumental, not in instrumental controlling all this. And I think that him and Merkel probably talked more than we ever knew or known. And now you got Olaf Scholz, who's a protege of Schroeder. So the ties are deep. And Macron, who believes that he is the reincarnation of Charles de Gaulle, but with better hair, is pursuing. And if I was Don Corleone, I would, when I look at Macron, I look at him like the famous line about the Taglia, that he's a pimp. Macron's a pimp, but Macron's a pimp for de Gaullism, or Gaullism as we'll call it, and trying to resurrect the role of France. So we got a lot of things at play here, except that they made the mistake because they want to be perceived as what was the line that you used? Oh, the deep green people, pulling from your article, and then they go to organic fertilizer. But all these things, as you pointed out last week, they're ridiculous because they're devoid of the reality of the common man, so to speak. It's like talking to children of my friends, and they don't understand why everybody doesn't shop at Whole Foods, or as my kids would say, whole paycheck. How can you not be buying organic? And I would look at them and go, do you understand that if everything was organic, that probably 20% of the people of the world would starve to death, maybe more? You can be against genetically modified foods, but you better find a way to feed a population of 8 billion. I mean, it's wonderful to think of all these things while you're living in the Fifth Avenue penthouse. Yeah, bubble doesn't even get it, but oh, what do you mean you can't afford it? Doesn't your trust fund check show up on on the 5th of the month? Or as Judd and I would laugh about sailing with Bickford, right? I always remember that. Just cut a check, Bick. It's so easy. It's just not that easy. And your article, I mean, it was phenomenal, but it said so many other things because it's not just fertilizer. What the fertilizer doth reveal is the excuse my French, bullshit of all these policies at the end of the day, because we do have to deal with the common man and how they're going to pay for this. And I love that you just went to the Sahel region of Africa, while meanwhile we also have the Russians and the Chinese heavily involved in the Horn of Africa, which is where so much of this energy discussion gets transported. And yet very few people talk about it. But people aren't standing still. We're all focused on the Ukraine. And that's, that becomes a whole nother topic. But it is tied in. And Europe, and Putin has gotten really what he wants because he's driving a wedge between Western Europe is certainly the quick role that Scholz and Macron, by going to Moscow so quickly. I mean, the wedge is driven.
Well, the other interesting thing, by the way, I think that, to be fair to Macron, I think he does, in fact, not have better hair than de Gaulle did.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, but yeah, that's true. And when he was in Moscow on the tarmac after he landed, before he'd met Putin, he suggested that Ukraine could be Finland. It could accept Finlandization. Well, A, he didn't ask the Ukrainians about that, and B, Finlandization was policy neutrality or friendliness while retaining a world integrated economy was paid at a heavy price in life by the Finns. Not a voluntary thing to do, and while Finland might be at the very edge of the Europe's interest or its line of defense or of its supplies. Between them, Ukraine and Russia are the first and second largest grain exporters in the world.
Right.
So if Putin were to decide that, well, never mind Dizard's opinion, I'm going to strike through Ukraine and take the port of Odessa and unite Crimea physically or more physically with Russia. He then had hands on the throat of the food supplies for Egypt and a whole bunch of other people. And, then you can't, never mind the fertilizer at that point, the marginal fertilizer, there wouldn't be enough grain unless you, jump when he says frog. And that is a possibility. He also would be in a bargaining position to say, well, I don't agree with your attempt to control my strategic interests. And what do you say to eating tomorrow? So, it could be done. And the France, and for that matter, the States, is not obliged by treaty and is unwilling in practice to defend Ukraine. So there's not much they could do about it. I still think it's unlikely because I think it would still kill too many Ukrainians and Russians, which would not be a popular move.
But when we look at that, I'm talking about rooms like this. Okay, so I think your point is very well taken. When you talk about grain, you're talking about wheat, where we may be talking about soybeans, and I don't think that's where you're at. But
no.
So what else is going on though is that China is stockpiling a whole lot of grain, and especially now. That's why grain. When I say grain, not just wheat and oats and barley, but they're buying so many beans, which is for protein purposes, because they're afraid that the South American crop is going to be far worse than originally expected, and so they're pursuing this, and it gives Putin yet an even stronger hand because that. So I think, see, again, you take us to places that are so good. But I want to ask you something, because in your article you talk about Europe through their use of lawyers and a 4 or 5 year time frame going to the WTO to challenge Russia's fertilizer exports. But to me, then it raises a very
Wait a minute. Sorry, it wasn't fertilizer exports. It was their acquisition of a European fertilizer manufacturer.
Okay.
Boreal.
But David and Ira, can I just ask a question?
Wait, Andrew, 1 second. Okay, so regardless, but that would be their ability to control the fertilizer production and pricing, right? Because I know you make the point about that's a great point. But the Russians are not members of WTO. So is that a good ploy to get them to, because in order to really make the case, you got to get them in the WTO. And if they got into the WTO, they would probably become a much more significant player.
Well, I think that you could challenge it through Austria.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that would be the angle. By the way, I got as part of a, email blast to journalists. I got a email today from JP Morgan Global Commodities Research, so totally public. And they point out an interesting, the topic of their little bullet points was that while the world is short commodities, China is not, and they say that China holds 84% of global copper, 70% of corn, 51% of wheat, 40% of soybeans, 26% of crude oil, and 22% of aluminum inventories. And the outside of China, global commodity inventories are at about down 18% since April 2020, and only about 62 days of consumption. The Chinese could have had they had lots of motivation, and by the way, that's for their visible inventories, not their strategic inventories. So nevertheless, it's useful. So they are holding a lot of stuff, and either they know something or they just like spending money.
Well, I mean, that was where I wanted to ask you the question, and equally Ira too. Ira's a brilliant mind, like you are too. I mean, this is for me as a financial market person, is this the financial market Cold War that they? I mean, look what he's done, Putin. I mean, oil's up, gold's up. He owns those reserves. His balance sheet is very well rewarded from what's occurred without spending too much money on a war. Do you think that's what he's up to?
Well, I think that his commercial interest is aligned with his strategic interest, and he would like that to be aligned with his domestic political interest. So does everything work according to plan always? No. Is it now? Yeah. By the way, the Russians didn't seem to take it personally, the column. They actually had a LinkedIn or whatever reach out to me afterwards, like, yeah, now you get it. It wasn't Fuzz Agro, which is a listed company. It was just like, that's hey, nothing personal. Whack.
But do you also see, David, that potentially that Putin and Xi Jinping clearly they're aligned, and the rest of the world is not aligned with them? Is that a fair comment? That's where the alliances lie?
Andrew, you're talking to John.
Sorry, John.
Okay. Do I think that's where they align? Yeah, this week. The things change, but it's an alliance of common perceived interest. There's a longer term uneasiness with each other, and the Chinese are much stronger economically and in terms of population, and they have Russia has very, very long supply lines and connections with the Far East, and there's a kind of racial component, mutual racial suspicion to all of this. But yeah, they're aligned. The Chinese, people look at the Chinese in Africa or their military interests. They're not, to the exception of Taiwan, the Taiwan thing. Yeah, they're building. They're trying to build a Atlantic-facing port in Africa, and they have some people in Africa, but they're not as militarily aggressive a power. Partly because it's they don't like they're a little less cold-blooded. Strangely, about the casualties, it's what I found most. One of the things I found most telling there was that a few years ago, the Chinese PLA was part of a UN task force in South Sudan, deconfliction patrol, blue helmet task force. Okay. Well, one night the local Islamists decided they would just say howdy, and came in and killed half a dozen Chinese soldiers who were patrolling. And there was just shock and outrage and distress in China over these losses, because in a one child per family policy, you run out of children. The emotional content of military casualties is much higher. So when these half dozen Chinese, he was 5, something like that, Chinese soldiers were sent back to China, they got heavily attended state funerals in each of their hometowns or home cities. It was like a big deal. It's much bigger than when George Stephanopoulos would do a "we thank you for your service" at the end of his Sunday talk show program and show a picture of all or some of the people who'd gotten shot in Afghanistan that week. There was real distress. So I think that they are building a lot of stuff, but projecting power, depends where. To Taiwan, maybe. That's could be. They talk that way, harder than it looks, and maybe they'll just have a air interdiction or a blockade or something like that, or some other kind of commercial interdiction, because I think that when you have an actual war with actual kids not coming home, it's a big problem. Evidently, as we see with the South Sudan thing, whoever you are, but especially in a zero or negative population growth country. And the same is true of Russia. Ukraine, the Putin is right, and he rings bells when he says, Ukraine is a corrupt government and corrupt corruptly led society. There's a lot of truth to that, but it hasn't led to the Russian people feeling any enmity for Ukrainians. The idea of dying to retake Ukraine, for what exactly? Not a very popular idea. In fact, they just don't think it'll happen. If it were to happen and you have, 10, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, whatever thousand casualties, over what? Just because Zelensky is, on the take from some oligarch, and some oligarch is, that's a tough sell. But what makes kind of more sense in a way is, rather than invade and then come into conflict with the Europeans, they'd rather milk them or drain them for as long as possible. So ideally, from their point of view, you'll wind up with Russian divorced men with European mistresses, not the other way around.
On that point, I mean, the predominant theme at the moment in the market is clearly short financial assets and long physical assets. That is long metals and short the paper, fiat or whatever stock, frankly. Do you think that is a predominant theme over 10 years or do you think
I'd be more inclined to be, over time, that we're talking about today and this month and this week. Yes.
Because the last 10 years, it was the opposite. It was like long financial assets and short physical assets.
Which financial? you know,
Sorry.
I'm still inclined to think that you can be long commodities from a trading perspective or a European structural perspective now, but I think that in a year you'll want to be long duration, because you have even with a 30-year yield here, you can't defease pension plan liabilities. So there's going to be when you say financial assets, I think that finding risk-free or fully hedged yielding assets a year from now is going to be a heavy load.
I agree.
Let me, John, if I can, let's go back. So it's interesting the take on, how you view the military potential. And yesterday, being February 17th, was the 43rd year, quote unquote, anniversary of the China invasion of Vietnam. Now, people have talked about U.S. Foreign policy. People have talked about, they're almost like they're hoping that Putin invades and gets bogged down in a Ukrainian quagmire. But, I've been very vocal in wherever I write and do podcasts that I don't believe that that's going to happen, that he's going to read from the Chinese playbook, which is go in for 2-3 weeks, create massive losses for the Ukrainians like the Chinese did. The Chinese took massive losses in 1979, but where some people thought it was, some people think that China got beat badly by Vietnam, but actually China did get all of their policies that they wanted, which was a rollback of Vietnam, oddly enough, the rollback between relations between China and the Soviet Union at the time. So if Putin goes and bloodies the Ukrainians, will he then be able? Well, it appears certainly that right now, let me digress from it, that Macron and Scholz certainly want to go back to the Minsk Accord, which Putin is now, promoting as a big thing. And of course, that didn't favor the Ukrainians, that favored Russia, because Europe at that time was in the middle of a debt crisis and was looking to resolve whatever issues they could resolve quickly, and that of course favored Russia. But if Putin goes in and bloodies the Ukrainians terribly and pulls back, does he get what he wants? And in all ways, economic, and of course he wants a written agreement that NATO is not going to expand to certain places. Will he get that without?
No. Well, first off, in order for one of the preconditions for a country to join NATO, which is a common defense, one against all, is you have to not have significant outstanding border conflicts, because people don't want to write a blank check to a couple dozen other people to have a call on their military force in the case they don't get along with some neighbor. So that would tend to block Ukraine. It would also block Georgia. So no, he's not going to get that. And the U.S. can't roll back its commitment to Poland. Romania is slightly less of an issue, but the Poles would not like it. So, but they definitely can't roll back their commitment to Poland because there's a very strong commitment based on active Polish Americans to Poland's existence within its borders. So the U.S. can't really do that. No American president could go back on that. I mean, Schultz may want to surrender, but he's got Poland between him and the Russians, apart from Kaliningrad. Okay. But he's got Poland in between them. And the Poles feel very strongly about it. And they would not be fighting a two-front war this time. So that I think is would prevent anything like this agreement from happening. The other thing is that the Europeans have a hard enough time pledging solidarity with each other while carrying out what are really unequal treaties and deals without abandoning another another set of European countries. So no, I see it. I mean, the one thing either keep up this this game and squeeze as much from their commodities and semi-processed products that they can, and try to get concessions on sanctions against individual Russians, against Russia generally, and against Putin in particular. Try to get rollbacks on those, and just be important again. They like all that.
Yeah.
So whereas, I mean, if they want to go, if they want to do more than that, then they'd really have to occupy the Black Sea coast, and that's not only a heavy lift. It would attract a lot of unwanted attention. Okay, so a bunch of Egyptians would starve, but it would be hard to hold it, and it would get the Turks worked up, and the Turks would, the Turks have tried to play a game of partly integrating with the Western defense and having a friendly, if not somewhat integrated, defense with the Russians. And that kind of halfway game would no longer fly with Turkey either. So,
but let me, so I agree, but I don't think that they're talking about rolling back Poland, but a guarantee that you wouldn't see. And I love your point about the borders issue. You don't write a blank check to, and that's part of that. But the Finns, when you talk about Finlandization, they've been talking about it quite a bit because they didn't like Finlandization, but of course it was necessary at the time. But the Finns have also said, well, because they're not in NATO either, and they say, well, it's our right. But I look at it, I go, first of all, it's not your right, it's a privilege to be able to join any.
No, it's a right. It's a right for them to have the right to apply. They're a sovereign country. Right. And also, Finland is one of those heavily armed countries in Europe, and proportionally far more heavily armed than they were in 1940. Mm. So they and the Swedes could join. It would be a bit of a provocation, but it also could probably happen. I don't think Ukraine could, for all kinds of reasons, starting with its uncontrolled, uncertain borders, and also the Putin is right. It's a pretty corrupt place. They shouldn't be dependent on Russia for gas. They should have drilled for their own gas a long time ago, so they could have been strategically independent. But they didn't do that because some oligarchs in Ukraine had an interest in the gas transit, and everybody was making money. So, but I think that that it's no remember that defense is not just like 1 inch over this border. The Americans have set up Patriot missiles in Poland, and the search and acquisition radars for those have necessarily have a range that's inside Belarusian and even Russian territory. So if the Americans pulled back their forward defense of Poland, what the Russians don't like is, among other things, that the Americans can kind of look into what's going on there. I think it's I think they're oversensitive and about that, and they're too worked up. But I think they've, to some degree, Putin has talked himself into that. Now, take a look at a open letter in Russian from a former member of the Russian Defense Council, and a lot of, and another one from a couple of hundred Russian military officers saying, "Don't invade Ukraine; it's stupid." And that's a, I mean, you wouldn't, I mean, the States is a, even in America, that would be a very dangerous thing to do. And in Russia, it was extremely significant. The reason there wasn't more public outrage about it is because the public doesn't think it's going to happen. Now, of course, they can be worked up. You know, a lot of people can be worked up into a war hysteria for a little while, but you know, it's going to cost you. And if they were able to control world grain exports as well as fertilizer and all of that, might conceivably be worth it. But that would be an expensive thing to do with an uncertain payout, and yeah, it would you know, starve the Egyptians and run up the price of your exports. But you could say, well, what would the Germans do? Well, the Germans would like to give in, but then they would have real problems using the banking system to pay for their Russian gas imports. So then what do they do?
Gold.
You know?
Yeah, I know, but here we'll get Andrew excited.
John, can I ask you a question, John?
Yeah.
Before others need to and Ira wants to speak to. I mean, your intellect is beyond. I mean, you know so much and your reach is broad. Where did this start from? How did you, I mean, what motivated you to learn this? And how did you get such reach?
Well, I don't know, not to flatter myself, but you know, I think that I don't think you can learn very much from simply working yourself around PowerPoint presentations. It's my secret is that I read not only the original document, but the footnotes and then the sources, and then look at those footnotes if I don't understand it. If I don't understand a technology or a process, I go and look at the scientific or technical papers on it. If I don't understand those, then I'll ask questions or look further into that and try to figure it out. So it is just a matter of reading. I have been, you know, quote unquote, inside the room in my life, and most of my experience is that the secret to inside information is that the people on the inside don't have good information. So you just have to do a lot of work. That's all.
Let me, because now when you talk about like the German payments for, well, let me ask you, when Biden says that Nord Stream will never happen if they invade, do you concur with that? Nord Stream
no.
2.
Well, Nord Stream 2 was redundant. So it's actually physically there. It's going through a German certification process before it's regulatory certification process before it's allowed to export. But the purpose of Nord Stream 2 is to make it possible for the Russians to cut off gas from Ukraine while maintaining gas supplies to Germany for a price, of course. And so it's redundant now anyway. But Biden is he says a lot of things, and maybe he remembers some of them.
So now the Russians have built a fortress balance sheet, as we would say.
Yeah, they have.
So can, because I would first start with it was tongue in cheek, but I'm no longer tongue in cheek. Can Putin, I mean, the Russian energy is needed on the world markets. There's no question about that. Whether it's how it gets there, different story, but we know so much of it is fungible anyway. Can Putin demand payment and really upset the whole Swiss system if he asks for payment in precious metals rather than taking anybody's currency and demanding that? Could that happen?
In the case of Germany, well, I mean, hypothetically, but the Germans have that. But I think that, yeah, precious metals at what price? And that's not part of their agreement. And also, yeah, they've put up a large, they've accumulated a lot of gold reserves, from mainly from, of course, internal production. But spending on those or taking payment in those, well, then what do they do? They have such industrial systems as they have, and a lot of the inputs they have require payment, to other people, other suppliers, German, even American, or anyway, foreign suppliers, and gold is an awkward and can be an expensive transaction, means of transaction. If it's just Germany giving gold to Russia, yeah, hypothetically you could do that, but is it a sustainable system? I don't think so, because they have a fortress balance sheet. But they have a diverse import requirements. You saw that the Runa plant in Russia is having to shut down because of part shortages. So they need a lot of machinery and other manufactured goods supplies to keep everything ticking over. It's not an autarkic society anymore, which is good for them. So I don't think that would be sustainable over time. And I think even the Germans would have a problem with it. At the worst case, yeah, they could do that. But it's not a very flexible means of payment for either, it's politically and logistically difficult for the Germans, and it's also then the Russians would have to find another way of doing payments. They could do this, and they've drawn up contingency plans, and their money is stashed away hither and yon. And I don't think a cutoff of the SWIFT system would work. For one thing, the SWIFT is a messaging system. It's actually not a clearing and settlement system. So could they just do things by telex and use an account in a third party? I mean, their errors and omissions account in Austrian finance is quite large, for example. So could they get around it? Yeah, I think that's much more. I think the Germans would and the Russians would have problems over any serious length of time with doing that.
All right, you've been great. And well, let me ask, so when we talk about, and you make that great point, you roll those statistics on the Chinese, what they've stockpiled as a percentage of global stockpiles. And it's interesting, and I know you're very knowledgeable about foreign exchange because I've read enough. So we've watched and we've discussed in this room, the strength of the yuan has been baffling to many, many people throughout this whole COVID period, because the previous mindset was, well, of course, stealing from the Japanese methodology of their growth from 70, 80 on, they used a weak currency. So whenever there was uncertainty and chaos in the world, in an effort to protect their exports, the currency would weaken. Now, through this whole period, the yuan has only strengthened and caught a lot of people by surprise. In fact, if we're looking today, the yuan is at 632.
Wow.
So,
Well,
so
the Chinese have, it seems pretty clear that they have over a very long term, or a long term, they have an interest in creating their own Asian currency area. And to do that, starting with a strong currency is a good idea. So over time, I would expect part of their trade surplus is a shortfall in internal demand at a time when the Americans and Western countries were maintaining their kind of political equilibrium, writing checks for imports from China. But the Chinese, their end goal is to establish the yuan as its own currency area. There are a lot of problems with doing that. One is that there's no fully investable curve in risk-free Chinese assets or in continuous credit curves, and people aren't sure about Chinese accounting. They don't know whether they can trust running things through the Chinese banking system. It hasn't finished clearing itself out from a lot of, really bad investments. That's a process, and so is using the yuan as a medium of exchange. There was a interesting, when I look at this in detail, you see that some of the opposition to this happening has been public from the PBOC, saying, well, there are a lot of problems with this. There's a cost to that. They have bilateral clearing arrangements with a laundry list of central banks. It's not the same thing as a multilateral clearing system, and it's a two-way street. It's something that takes time to do, and so is this them implementing it in real time? Over time, yeah, they are. They want foreign investors to be able to come into China and have a continuous government, tradable and want foreigners to have some degree of enforcing contract rights in China, so that they can create their own multilateral currency system with the yuan as an anchor currency. But they haven't done that. Remember, it happened in the States when America had a absurdly strong current account. And the Chinese are kind of in that position now, but demographically, that starts to shift. And as for the fortress balance sheet, I remember being in Portugal in 1975 when they had just overthrown, about a year, a little less than a year actually, after an army coup had overthrown the previous dictator, and that Portugal had enormous gold reserves relative to its requirements. It's one of the proportionally largest gold reserves in the world. But even conservatives there were saying at the time, this is at a time when a left of Communist Party coup was in the making. They would tell me that Salazar and his successors had made a mistake by concentrating on the fortress balance sheet and not enough on economic growth. It didn't work in the end. It worked for a long time, didn't work in the end. So yeah, fortress balance sheet is good tactically and in the medium term, but the neglect of the Russia's growth potential is not.
It's
John,
right.
can I just divert the conversation and ask a question around the end game about this, in terms of where did the problem start and why? Was it when Nixon took us off the gold standard and gave us a free run? Are we now at that end game? And do you think, as a consequence of that, where does that go? Is that why Russia and China are playing the game? They recognize that the credit system is running out of puff?
Well, that certainly gives them they can certainly take tactical advantage of it and medium-term advantage. Is this the end of the game? Not yet. It's a process, not an event. And was when Nixon went off that was certainly, I don't think in the end that was a good idea, but he didn't feel like taking the heat for a contractionary policy and a fixed exchange rate when he faced re-election. That wasn't, he was a kind of a lot smarter than this president and a master tactician and strategist in a way, but he didn't feel like he was an opportunist, and opportunism works in the short run, as it did with Nixon. But it's a real problem for the states, especially because the political dialogue is not realistic. I think that before the U.S. comes back, which I think is still possible, it has to have more of a political consensus and honest public dialogue than it does now.
Thank you.
Yeah, just speaking of Nixon, there's been a lot of talk recently in North America and in Europe, and something that IRA has written about also recently, and that's on wage and price controls. What are your thoughts on that and the effects, say, on the bond market?
Well, they're the kind of Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, the whole crew in the White House that would like to do that. It would even be more ridiculous than it was in the 70s. This is a much more open and dependent economy than it was then, and a much less self-sufficient one. And it would get gamed away, and an attempt would collapse of its own weight very quickly. And guidance would, even that sort of guidance, it's a fantasy land. They might try, but they might propose it, but it wouldn't get anywhere. I mean, it would be a bad idea. And I think it would be, in the end, it would lead to a contractionary impulse that would be paradoxically good for the bond market, because the political reaction would go beyond just losing the midterm elections. These are very desperate and not very smart people, so they might come up with something. Executing it is, another thing.
Richard, I'm glad you brought that up, but John, and you desperate people, as you say, because the scary thing about this administration, and I know all politics ultimately comes down to the ability to produce optics, but this group, and it was even revealed in that recent piece in the Atlantic by George Packer, of all people, about how they left Afghanistan and the optics. They were so concerned about the optics. And then we go to November with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That was an optic.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That was a good, yeah. That was a good. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? They don't know.
They're very concerned, overly concerned, I might add, about optics. That's what they are concerned with. They very little else, because they knew. You saw it right away, and when the Strategic Petroleum Reserve came out of the recent November elections, when the Democrats across the country did so badly, and all the White House political operatives said it's because of inflation. It's not because of anything else. It's because of headline inflation is killing us. So of course we got the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and that's why I raised that possibility, because of wage and price controls in some fashion, because they are put in a bind of we must do something. There's no sitting. It's like the Fed. We must do something. We can't just sit here until it gets, so they're going to look for the optics. So I figured by June, July, and I'm glad that Richard brought that out because, I throw that out there. Headline inflation is not going to decline because the rent element of it is just catching up to what the reality was last year. I mean, we got 7.5% headline inflation with the BLS numbers on rent, which were ludicrous.
Which were lagged. And it's a rolling, owner equivalent rent, et cetera. I mean, good luck, guys. I mean, that's those, make bigger fools of themselves. First off, price controls, wage controls.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So oil companies are evil, et cetera, but wage controls, try selling that.
Well, I know that's but they'll have to figure that out. But you're right. But when they opened up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I was doing a live radio because somebody called me and said, "Oh, we want you to talk about it." But their narrative, of course, well, this was a great thing. I said it'll be a great thing for 3 days, and then you're going to cry that it's the large oil refiners who are the only ones who could take this, by the way, who made windfall profits. Well, gee, you think there was no, but they were so enamored with the headline,
that's very different from execute on a strategy. You actually can open the taps, not actually at a very fast rate for the SPR, but then that's actually not the legal justification for it. And to do wage and price controls, you have to have a legal basis for it, as well as a political explanation for why people's wages are being controlled. And I don't know if you remember the success of the Whip Inflation Now program.
Wait, hold on. I'm going optic on you here. I'm going optic because interesting. Now we didn't set this up. Okay, there we go. If you can see that, I have my win button.
Yeah. My girlfriend at the time worked in the White House press office, and I said, this is pathetic. Anyway, they tried. Hey, listen, guys, I gotta finish the edit of my column. So I had a lot of pushback on it because I was casting doubt on the Fed's how the Fed could control. It could meet its inflation control targets while not shrinking its balance sheet.
So that was basically the next subject.
Oh, we're with you. We've had so many discussions.
We need to let you go because obviously you have much more to do. In saying that, though, once they went into a world that they had no empirical evidence to control, did they really know what they got themselves into?
Well, I mean, people do a lot of stupid things. I mean, just because something would be, I've often thought in trying to figure out what's going to happen, oh no, that would be suicidal. Yeah, but people commit suicide.
Tom, I know you have to go, but just very quickly, hello, it's Alexander Penn from
Hi.
Partners. Hey. Just quickly, as you can appreciate, much of the participants today are either traders, investors, or both. And just a very quick question. When you sent and this comes from a trader investor in Silicon Valley, when you synthesized your domain expertise and put on a trader's hat, how would you exploit these opportunities over the next 6 months? Long, nat gas, oil, ferts, companies such as Nutrient, Mosaic, CF Industries. If you can just quickly, if you have something.
Well, I'm not in the, RIA business, but I actually think that there'll be I actually like gold, but I don't think of it as a speculative position. I think of it as like an alternative currency. or as a parallel currency. As for let me think, the gas price isn't going down a whole bunch with that, a lot of demand destruction, because producers are, while they're not totally disciplined, the drillers, the E&P companies, while they're not totally disciplined, are not spending so much that they can overwhelm it. I think the oil producers have yet to peak. I think gas in Europe is different than gas in the States. And I'd be waiting for a even more aggressive sell-off in the bond curve, and then go long duration, because I think that there will be some pretty aggressive demand destruction, and then people will be say, wait a minute, my pension funding, my duration matching, I think I got a problem here.
Yeah. Penn, can I just interrupt for 1 second? Because if you're writing that column about
I really pressured to close it.
Okay, I know, but Robert Armstrong wrote a great piece last week, I don't know, at the FT. So good, I'm hoping you pick up from there, because I thought that was a great piece, and it really
he did a good job. He did a good job.
I agree.
Oh,
Hey, John,
okay.
very quickly, I know you have to go, and thank you very much for, I think it was a really rich and deep, and I think you very thought-provoking conversation here, and you certainly, I feel like, have been in a master class in getting an education in all things that John Dizard's interested in, that we're clearly interested in. Hey, John, maybe we can do this again, and it would be fun to
Sure, yeah.
do on a regular basis, maybe once.
Okay, great. It'd be fun. Yes, indeed. It's a great conversation with you guys, and keep them coming, and take care.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, John. You too. Thank you very much.
Your editor.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Большое спасибо.
Oh, you're welcome.